The story you are about to hear is not taught in medical school, not in dental school, not in public health. It's a timeline hidden in plain sight, a collapse of human physiology that began the moment a single chemical was added to the water supply. For decades, governments told us it was for dental protection. But when you follow the data, the endocrine changes, the neurological decline, the metabolic disorders, the explosion of autoimmune disease, a different story appears. A story that does not end in the mouth, but begins there. This is the fluoride collapse. It starts in the mid-20th century. A world recovering from war. A world rebuilding factories, aluminum plants, fertilizer industries. And a world quietly drowning in fluoride waste, a byproduct so corrosive it killed crops, burned lungs, and required industrial companies to pay massive damages to farmers. Then something changed. Instead of paying to dispose of this toxic byproduct, someone had an idea: what if we call it medicine? What followed was not just water fluoridation. It was the beginning of a physiological experiment on entire populations. An experiment with effects that reach far beyond the teeth. Because fluoride is not simply a mineral. Fluoride is a biological disruptor. A chemical antagonist of the thyroid. A suppressor of metabolic rate. A competitor of iodine. A destabilizer of bone remodeling. A chronic irritant of mucosal surfaces, including those in the mouth. And once it entered the water supply, everything began to shift. By the 1960s, pediatricians noted a strange rise in hypothyroid children, a condition once considered rare. By the 1970s, autoimmune diseases that were almost non-existent at the turn of the century began climbing year after year. By the 1980s and 90s, a new epidemic emerged: chronic fatigue, infertility, hormonal collapse. Then came the 2000s. A generation with more bone loss, neurodevelopmental delay, dental abnormalities, hormonal suppression, cognitive decline than any generation before. All while water fluoridation increased. But none of this was viewed as connected, because looking at the whole body, the whole human system, was not allowed. Medicine had been divided into compartments. Teeth here. Hormones there. Bones in another room. Neurology in a different building. A perfect structure to hide systemic damage. Let's follow the physiology that no one is supposed to talk about. When fluoride enters the body, it does not stay in the mouth. It travels through blood, bone, glands, and brain. And everywhere it goes, it leaves a fingerprint. It binds calcium. It competes with iodine. It mimics hydroxyl groups inside bone. It accumulates in the pineal gland, leading researchers in the early 2000s to a disturbing discovery: the pineal gland accumulates more fluoride with age than any other tissue in the human body. A gland responsible for melatonin, circadian rhythm, reproductive hormones, neuroprotection, mood regulation. Silenced. At the same time, fluoride slows thyroid hormone conversion. T4, T3 becomes inefficient. Metabolism slows. Energy collapses. Weight gain increases. And, in the mouth, a new terrain appears: more dry mouth, more acidity, more periodontal inflammation, more bone vulnerability, more cavity risk in those with low saliva flow. The exact opposite of the prevention message. Because a body with low thyroid function is a body with impaired bone turnover. And the first bone that shows this decline is not the femur. It's the bone around the teeth. Dentists began noticing it decades ago, but could never explain why patients with good hygiene had worsening bone loss. The answer was not in the toothbrush. It was in the water. Then came the neurological findings. In the early 2000s, researchers worldwide began publishing a string of studies linking fluoride exposure to lower IQ scores in children. At first, the findings were dismissed. Then repeated. Again. And again. And again. Over 70 studies from multiple continents. Different populations. Different methodologies. Same conclusion. But something even more concerning emerged: fluoride had a dose-dependent effect on developing brains. The younger the child, the more vulnerable the brain. And the damage occurred at levels widely considered safe. Still, public messaging never changed. Meanwhile, bone experts began seeing a rise in skeletal fluorosis, a bone-hardening disease once thought to occur only in heavily contaminated regions. But cases were reported in fluoridated countries, too. Misdiagnosed as arthritis, fibromyalgia, unexplained pain syndromes. Because skeletal fluorosis looks like other diseases, until you look deeper. Into bone density. Into bone brittleness. Into osteoblast function. Into the silent accumulation of fluoride inside the collagen matrix. A process that ages the skeleton from the inside out. And if this happens in long bones, imagine what happens in the fragile trabecular bone that holds the teeth. Then came the endocrine findings. Studies began showing fluoride's impact on testosterone levels, estrogen metabolism, progesterone pathways, parathyroid hormone, vitamin D activation, insulin signaling, adrenal function. A chemical that affects thyroid inevitably affects every hormone downstream, including those regulating bone turnover, immune response, energy, fertility, and oral microbiome stability. But the public was still told the same message: it's good for your teeth. By the 2010s, something undeniable appeared: a chronically inflamed population, a metabolically broken generation, and a curve of disease explosion almost perfectly overlapping with decades of water fluoridation. Was it the only factor? Of course not. But it was the silent factor. The one no one was watching. The one considered too small to matter, but biologically too active to ignore. A chemical that affects the thyroid affects the metabolism. A chemical that affects melatonin affects the brain. A chemical that affects bone affects the jaw. A chemical that affects hormones affects immunity. A chemical that suppresses saliva affects every oral disease. The collapse was not sudden. It was slow. Layered. Hidden inside the normality of daily life. A decline in human physiology disguised as progress. And now we face the consequences: a world with record levels of autoimmune disease, bone loss, infertility, early puberty, metabolic collapse, neurological disorders, cognitive decline, dental arches shrinking, airway disorders, chronic oral inflammation, all rising in parallel to chemical exposures once declared safe. This is not a conspiracy. It is a timeline. A biological story. A predictable cascade of endocrine disruption. And fluoride is only one piece. But an important piece, because it was the first one they normalized. The first experimental chemical added to the body of every man, woman, and child without consent. The moment the collapse began. This was the fluoride collapse. And this is only the beginning of what the ARC will expose next.